trial of 7. That is my right, I do believe.
A trial of 7 must be held at dawn.
Must be 7 against 7.
You must find 6 other knights to fight beside you.
The depiction of the Trial of 7 in A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is perhaps one of the greatest examples of cinematic realism within the entire Game of Thrones series. Instead of portraying combat as a romanticized spectacle filled with graceful swordplay and heroic choreography, the series presents battle as chaotic, exhausting, and deeply human. Through deliberate cinematographic choices, such as a first-person perspective, immersive sound design, environmental realism, and the portrayal of Dunk's physical limitations, this sequence places the people watching inside the experience of combat rather than simply observing it. The result is a fight that feels grounded and authentic, transforming a medieval fantasy duel into something that resembles the brutal uncertainty of real combat. One of the most notable techniques used during the Trial of 7 is the use of first-person perspective. At key moments during the fight, the camera shifts to Dunk's point of view, allowing us to see the battle through the narrow eye slits of his helmet. This approach dramatically alters the way the scene is experienced. Rather than providing wide, sweeping shots that clearly show every movement, the camera limits the viewer's vision just as Dunk's vision is limited by his armor. The audience sees fragmented glimpses of the battlefield, brief flashes of lances, shields, and charging knights without a clear understanding of what is happening around them. This restricted perspective replicates the confusion and claustrophobia that a real fighter might feel while wearing heavy armor in the middle of a violent melee. By placing us inside Dunk's helmet, the scene also conveys his emotional state. The enclosed metal helmet becomes a physical symbol of his vulnerability and fear. The audience is not simply watching Dunk fight, they are experiencing his panic and disorientation alongside him. When blows land or enemies rush toward him, the viewer perceives them from the same limited and unstable perspective. This technique creates a powerful sense of immersion, making the violence feel immediate and personal rather than distant or stylized. The sound design plays an equally important role in reinforcing the realism of this scene. Instead of relying heavily on dramatic music to guide the audience's emotions, the scene emphasizes the physical sounds of combat and Dunk's own breathing. As the battle intensifies, his breathing becomes louder and more labored, reminding the viewer that he is exhausted, frightened, and struggling to survive. The rhythmic sound of breathing inside the helmet adds to the sense of confinement created by the visual perspective. After Dunk is attacked, the audio becomes distorted, with ringing tones and muffled sounds replacing the clarity of the battlefield. This auditory effect mirrors the sensation of being stunned or concussed after a heavy hit. The world momentarily fades into disorientation, as if Dunk is struggling to regain his senses. By reproducing this sensory disruption, the scene allows us to feel the physical impact of the fight. Rather than presenting combat as a clean exchange of sword strikes, this scene highlights the bodily trauma that accompanies every blow. The environmental detail here also further contributes to the realism of the Trial of 7. The battlefield is muddy, chaotic, and physically difficult to navigate. Armor quickly becomes covered in mud, and the ground turns slick as combatants fall and struggle to regain their footing. This attention to mud, blood, and grime grounds the scene in physical reality. In many fantasy portrayals of knights, armor remains polished and clean even during combat, giving the impression of a stylized or storybook battle. In contrast, this sequence emphasizes how quickly such idealized imagery collapses once violence begins.
Trial of 7? Duncan, that means battle axes, morning stars, and lances of war.
I know what it means.
shining armor of the knights becomes smeared with mud and blood, reinforcing the brutal reality of the fight. The use of fog in the environment adds another layer of realism and atmosphere. Although the Trial of Seven is a large and public event meant to be witnessed by a crowd, the fog obscures much of the battlefield and limits visibility. This visual choice creates a sense of isolation among the combatants. Even though 14 knights are fighting in the same space, the fog makes it appear as though each participant is battling alone. Figures emerge suddenly from the mist and disappear again, increasing the unpredictability of the scene. This isolation heightens the tension of the battle. Dunk is surrounded by allies and enemies, yet the fog prevents him from clearly understanding what is happening around him. The audience shares this uncertainty, which reinforces the chaotic nature of medieval combat. Instead of a carefully choreographed fight where every movement is visible, the scene reflects the confusion and unpredictability of real conflict. Perhaps the most significant element contributing to the realism of the scene is Dunk himself. Unlike many fantasy protagonists, he is not portrayed as a flawless or highly trained warrior. Dunk is inexperienced, and this lack of skill is visible throughout the fight. His movements are slower and less precise than those of more seasoned knights. At times he appears clumsy, struggling with the weight of his armor and the chaos around him. His strikes are not elegant or theatrical. They are desperate and sometimes awkward attempts to just survive the fight. This portrayal contrasts sharply with the typical depiction of heroic knights in fantasy stories, where protagonists often defeat opponents with effortless skill. Dunk's lack of experience makes the fight feel unpredictable and dangerous. Every movement carries the possibility of failure. When he is knocked from his horse or wounded, the audience understands that he could realistically lose. His victory is not guaranteed, but must be earned through endurance and determination. The cinematography reinforces this sense of struggle. The camera often stays close to Dunk, capturing the physical strain on his body as he fights. Instead of cutting rapidly between different angles to create a sense of stylized action, the scene lingers on moments of exhaustion, pain, and recovery. Dunk struggles to stand and continues fighting despite his injuries. These moments emphasize that combat is not a graceful contest, but a brutal test of endurance. Because of these choices, the Trial of Seven feels less like a fantasy spectacle and more like an ordeal. The viewer experiences the weight of armor, the panic of limited visibility, the ringing of blows to the head, and the exhaustion of prolonged combat. The fight becomes something messy and unpredictable rather than heroic and theatrical.
He's dead! It's over!
Get up.
This depiction of the Trial of Seven demonstrates how fantasy storytelling can achieve powerful realism through cinematic technique. By focusing on Dunk's subjective experience, this scene transforms the battle into something deeply immersive and emotionally intense. The mud-covered battlefield, the muffled sounds inside the helmet, and the protagonist's clumsy struggle all contribute to a vision of combat that feels grounded and authentic. Instead of presenting knights as flawless heroes in shining armor, the scene portrays them as vulnerable human beings caught in a violent and chaotic struggle. The result is a battle sequence that feels less like a storybook duel and more like a glimpse into the harsh reality of medieval combat. Through its commitment to realism, we feel as if we are standing beside Dunk in the mud, struggling to survive. And that is why when Dunk wins, it is all the more impactful.
I withdraw my accusation.